Hey, Rocky Fork, thank you for joining us today. We hope that you will stay connected by downloading our app.
Well, good morning, Rocky Fork. I am nowhere near as exciting as those guys. So I will forgive you if you fall asleep because you've expended all your energy, especially in the front row. My name is Chris, and I am thrilled to be with you. And I'm really, really happy to see the kiddos in the room. I think that's really awesome that we get to worship with them and that we get to spend an hour with them just praising God. So I hope you had some fun with the music. Kiddos, we've got some more stuff for you a little bit later on. We'll get to that in a minute. But we are almost through with our sermon series called Ordinary. Ordinary. And it's all about how God does extraordinary things with ordinary people by empowering us with the Holy Spirit. And so when we commit our lives to Christ, when we confess Him as our Savior, when we're baptized, we come up out of the water and we are a new creation, filled with the Holy Spirit and empowered to do the things that He wants us to do to build His kingdom. And so we've been talking about that stuff, those characteristics of God that are part of the Spirit. That's what we've been talking about for the past few weeks. And Paul talks about what the fruit of the Spirit is in Galatians 5:22 and 23. Paul says that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. So that's what we've been talking about. Jonathan, a couple of weeks ago, talked about joy. That's what we sang about this morning, joy. Anthony last week talked about peace. They both did awesome up here. We can give them a round of applause. They were great. Thank you. And this week, we're going to be talking about another characteristic of the Spirit. And that characteristic is faithfulness. Faithfulness. Now, faith is one of those churchy words, right? We use churchy words all the time, and we mean well, but I'm not sure that everybody knows exactly what faith means. In fact, I would guess if you asked everybody in this room to define faith, you would get lots of different answers. Some people would say faith equals belief. Some people would say it means trust. Some people would say it means being certain. Well, all of those are part of it, but none of them quite capture all of it. So if we're going to know what faith really is, probably the best place to look is where faith is defined. In Scripture, right? So we're going to look in Scripture to see what it says. And there's tons of stories all through Scripture about faith. People who are faithful in the Old Testament. Story after story after story of leaders and kings and prophets who are all faithful. All faithful. And then in the New Testament, again, you've got rabbis who are faithful and disciples who are faithful. Jesus was faithful. But I want to look at one place in particular. And if you're going to look at any place in Scripture to find what faith is all about, I would point you to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11 is all about faith. That's where we're going to spend our time this morning. So, Hebrews is a little bit different book. It's different than most of the books in the New Testament because we don't know for sure who wrote it. A lot of people think it was Paul, but we don't know for certain that it was him. What we do know is in chapter 2 that the author of Hebrews says that he knew the disciples, right? He heard directly from the disciples of Jesus. So we know he's connected to the disciples of Jesus. And we also don't know who this letter was written to. Like, Paul wrote letters to the Galatians, and he wrote letters to the Colossians, and he wrote letters to specific churches, but this letter, we're not really sure exactly who he wrote it to. What we do know is that this letter was written to people, and the author expected them to know a lot about Old Testament history. A lot. Like, all of it. All of the first 5 books of the Old Testament especially. He expected them to know all of it. And so, we can assume that this letter, this book, was written to people who were Christians of Jewish descent, so Jewish Christians. So Paul, if he wrote it, and if not, is just the author. The author of Hebrews just says, the first 10 chapters, I'm going to spend talking about how great Jesus is, how amazing Jesus is, how Jesus is the Messiah. He is God's Son, and He has been the plan to save us from the very beginning. Jesus has always been the plan. And then the author is going to challenge his readers to remain faithful. In fact, at the end of chapter 10, the author says, if you are a follower of Christ, you're part of this big faith family, this huge faith family, and we should be continuing to be faithful as our forefathers have been faithful, as the people before us have been faithful. And so that's what leads us to chapter 11. At the beginning of Hebrews 11, verse 1, Paul defines Hebrews, written by Paul. I'm saying it's Paul. I'm just going to say it because Paul wrote most of the New Testament. So, we don't know for sure. The author says, this is what faith really is. Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. So some translations word it a little differently. The New English translation says that faith is being sure of what we hope for, being convinced of what we can't see. So let's break that down just a little bit. Remember who this letter was written to. This letter was written to Jewish Christians. What were Jewish Christians hoping for? What were Christians in general hoping for? Right? They're hoping for God's kingdom to come. Isn't that right? Isn't that what we're all hoping for God's kingdom to come? They're hoping for the return of the Messiah. They're hoping to spend eternity with the Father. That's what they're hoping for. And so the author says that faith is basically God's guarantee that those things that we hope for are going to happen. That's what faith really is. And we can be certain of it. He also says that we can know that God created the world. Were any of you there at the beginning? Like when God created? Now, do you know that God created the world, though? Yeah, that's faith. That is faith. We can be certain that what God says is true and that what He promises He will do. That's what faith is. And the author goes on to talk about some of those incredible stories of faith in chapter 11. He talks about lots of different people. And he begins each story by saying, by faith, this person did this thing that God asked them to do. This week, at Family Summer Blowout, we're going to be talking about 3 of those stories from Hebrews 11. That's why we're calling Family Summer Blowout the Big Faith Experience, right? We're going to see what big faith looks like. I'm not as good as Anthony. Anthony's really much better at this loud stuff. I don't know. Hopefully, what we're going to learn is how we can have our own big faith. That's what we hope. The end of the week, big faith will be yours. Right? So this morning, what I want to do is give you a sneak peek preview of what we're going to be learning. So if you're going to be here this week, pay attention. You might get some things that will give you bonus points during the week. Okay? So we're keeping score. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to need your help. I am going to need your help. Because there's a lot of really good stories, and sometimes I get a little confused about who is who. So I know we're going to be talking about a guy who built a big boat, And I know we're going to be talking about a guy who had lots of sons. And I know we're going to be talking about a guy who parted the Red Sea. But what I need you to do is keep me straight and tell me who those people are. Who was it that built the ark? Noah. Yes, that's right. Noah built the ark. And who was the guy who had lots of sons? Father Abraham. There's a lot of people who had lots of sons. Why him? Father Abraham had lots of sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. You know the song. I'm not going to sing it. All right. So, Noah built the ark. Abraham had lots of sons. Who parted the Red Sea? Moses. Moses, that's right. Okay. So, as we go through this morning, I might get confused and I'll have to ask you again. So, I just need you to yell it out if I ask. It's okay, kids. You can yell in church today. This morning. For the next few minutes only. All right. So, that's what we need to do. So, remind me again, who built the big boat? Noah. That's right. That's right. So let's see what Hebrews 11 says about Noah. Hebrews 11:7 says this. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became the heir of righteousness that is in keeping with faith. Now, I know we've had a lot of rain recently, but we are smack dab in the middle of the country. If I asked you to build a big boat, like bigger than this building boat, would you do it? Probably not. Probably not. But that's what happened here. God came to the guy who built the boat. Who was that again? Noah. Yeah, Noah. God came to Noah and said, I want you to build a boat that's big enough to house 2 of every animal on the planet. Oh, yeah, and your family. We want you to build that boat. Now, so there's Noah. This guy's just hanging out in the desert in Iraq. He's just being a good guy, minding his own business. The world's falling apart around him, and God says, I'm gonna destroy everything. But I see that you're faithful. I want to save you. And so he says to Noah, I need you to build a boat. Now, if I'm Noah, I'm thinking, I'm in the desert. Why do you want me to build a boat? Really? A boat? Now, Noah's thinking that. He's got to have lots of doubt. Think about the people around Noah in town. Who's the weirdo building the boat in the middle of the desert? You know they've got to be thinking that. And so Noah is putting up with all of that. He's got to be getting harassed all the time. And he goes on building for decades. Like, it took him somewhere between 50 and 120 years to build the boat. That's a long time to do that and be made fun of. Like, I don't like to be made fun of for a couple of minutes. For years? But Noah does it. He does it. See, what Noah does is he listens to what God says. He believes and trusts what God says is true. And then he obeys God's command. That is what faith looks like. Noah was faithful. Noah was faithful. All right, so Noah built the ark. Now, who is the guy with lots of sons? Abraham. Abraham, right. So Abraham was also faithful. Let's listen to what Hebrews says about Abraham and Sarah. By faith, starting in verse 8, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder was God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, And he, as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. So just like Noah, Abraham was asked by God to do something really difficult. God asked Abraham to move. Abraham, I need you to move away from where you are. Abraham's comfortable living with his family. Everything's good. Life is cozy. And then God says to Abraham, I need you to move. And so you don't know where I want you to move to, but I just want you to go. Just go. And so Abraham says, all right, whatever you say, God, I'll do it. So he gave up his life of comfort to live the life of a nomad. And he walked for hundreds of miles to Canaan. Now, let's put this in today's terms. Imagine if I told you right now to go out the door and start heading northwest. And just keep walking until I tell you to stop. And when you get to South Dakota, I'll tell you to stop. That's a long way. And then I want you to turn southwest. And I want you to keep walking until I tell you to stop. And I'll tell you to stop in Denver. Yeah. Oh, by the way, you're going to have to carry everything you own with you. All in, right? You guys are all ready to go. Everybody's got their backpacks. They're ready to go. No, not like that at all. I mean, that sounds awful to me. Like, I don't even like to walk to the building next door. So, man, moving like that, hundreds of miles, not knowing where you're going, that's terrible. But Abraham did it. He trusted God and he obeyed. And so, Abraham is faithful. And then, even more, God promised Abraham, he said, you're going to have lots of descendants, lots of them. As many as the stars in the sky, as many as the sand on the seashore. There's a problem. Abraham was old. Like really old, like older than me. Old. Not just 50, like 100. Abraham is 100 years old. He's not going to have any more kids, right? No. God promised him he would have kids, and at 100 years old, his wife is 90, Sarah is 90, they have their first child, Isaac. So Abraham and Sarah trusted God, they listened to what he said, they were obedient to his command, they were faithful. Abraham and Sarah were faithful, even when it looked impossible. All right, so Noah built the ark, Abraham had lots of sons, and who parted the Red Sea? Moses, right, Moses. Let's see what Hebrews says about Moses. Starting in verse 24, it says this, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. But when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. All right, so the story of Moses is a massive part of the Old Testament. It is a lot of the Old Testament, the story of Moses. Moses is a Hebrew born in a time where all the Hebrew baby boys were being killed. But he somehow manages to wind up in Pharaoh's house. And he is raised by Pharaoh's daughter. But Moses does some things he shouldn't do, and he's afraid, so he runs away. And he runs away into the desert, and he stays there for 20 years, and God calls him back. Moses, I need you to come back, and I need you to lead your people out of Egypt. And so He does. He's like, I'm not sure I want to go back there. And God continues to say, you're the one I want to lead my people, and so he goes. And God tells him to go to Pharaoh, and he tells him what to say, and 10 times he goes to Pharaoh, and 10 times Pharaoh says, I'm not letting your people go. Until finally, Pharaoh gives in, and Moses leads his people out of Egypt. It's awesome that Moses is able to do that. And so he's booking it out of town with 1 million people behind him, right? As fast as 1 million people can go, he's going. And they're running away from Egypt, and they're being chased by Pharaoh's army. And they come to the Red Sea. And now they're trapped. They're stuck. Pharaoh's army behind them, the Red Sea in front of them, and they don't know what to do. It looks bad. And Moses says, God, what do I do? And God says, stretch out your hand, and I will part the sea, and you can walk through. And so Moses is like, well, I've never done that before, but I'm going to give it a shot. And so he stretches out his hand, and God parts the sea, and they walk through it. 1 million plus people walking through the sea. That's incredible, right? And they get to the other side, and Pharaoh's army is still chasing them. And so Moses is like, okay, so we got to cross the sea, so are they. And God says, stretch out your hand again. And so he stretches out his hand again, and the water comes in, and the Pharaoh's army is drowned. So Moses, he is faithful even when things look really bad, like trapped with 1 million people. Things look bad, and Moses listens to what God says. He trusts in God's promise, and he obeys. That is what faith looks like. Now, Hebrews 11 goes on to tell lots of stories about lots of different people who were faithful, like Noah and Abraham and Moses. But listen to what Hebrews 11:13 says. It says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Now, I want you to think about this for just a minute. Noah was faithful. He built a boat in the middle of the desert. But even after the flood, his family's the only one who survives. Even after the flood, Noah doesn't get to see all that God does in restoring his creation. He doesn't get to see the end. Noah dies being faithful. Abraham was faithful. Sarah was faithful. And they're blessed with their son Isaac. But they didn't get to see the millions of descendants that would come from their line. They didn't get to see that. They died being faithful. And Moses led his people out of Egypt towards the promised land, but even Moses didn't actually get to experience the promised land. He died being faithful. So what's the point, right? It's like, I don't get to have the prize at the end? No. Here's the thing. This is what a life of faith looks like. A life of faith looks like a lot of wonderful things along the journey. But the end is the best prize of all. Because the end for the person who remains faithful is eternity in heaven with the Father. It doesn't get any better than that. It doesn't get any better than that. And so that's the point. And so the author of Hebrews starts the very next chapter, chapter 12, with that reminder. Chapter 12, verse 1 says this, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses," all these faith stories we just heard about, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and not lose heart. Here's what you need to know about faithfulness. Like every other fruit of the Spirit, it is part of God's character. Faithfulness is part of God's character. And he freely gives that to us. He gives his faithfulness to us. He is faithful. He always keeps his promises. And so when things get difficult, when people around us start to doubt us, like people did Noah, we can be faithful like Noah was faithful. Even when we don't understand why. Even when we don't know for sure what's happening. Well, build a boat in the desert. Why? Because God said. And what God said is true. God said so. God is faithful, so I will be faithful. We can continue to move forward on our journey in life, not knowing where our destination is. Abraham, take a walk until I say stop. Be faithful. We can be faithful when we don't know what's next. We can have faith that God will do what he says he will do, even when we can't imagine how it would happen. Like, I don't know, having a kid when you're 100 years old. Yuck. You can be unafraid when you're trapped, when you're stuck between the Red Sea and the army, because you're faithful, because God promised you that he would deliver you. And he is faithful. So you can be faithful. These stories remind us that we can be faithful because God has shared his faithfulness with us. He gives it to us for free. It is the gift that lives within us when we have the Spirit. We can be faithful because God is faithful. So I don't know where your doubt is or where your fear is. I don't know what you're afraid of. I don't know where your frustration is or where your uncertainty is. I don't know. I don't know what it is that is hindering you right now, but I know this. You can be faithful because God is faithful, and he gives you his faithfulness. Faithfulness is a gift from God. If you are looking for faithfulness to overcome that kind of fear or doubt, if you want to pray about that, come up. Come on up. We'll pray. We'll pray with you. If you don't have the gift of the Spirit in you, so you don't have that gift of faithfulness yet, come up. We can baptize you, and when you come up out of the water, that gift of faithfulness is yours. You can be faithful because God is faithful. Would you stand and sing?